Well, I've got to sanitize my hands before I start. Definitely. Ooh. Oh, sad. My God. Oh, does not really smell that nice, but really necessary during the COVID times. Well, let's get started. Today we are going to have a look at the game from the candidates tournament, which got underway today. The tournament is full of surprises because there have been some ups and downs which were not really expected. Today we are going to have a look at a game between Ding Liren and Wang Hao, and it was quite an interesting game. Stay tuned until the end. But before that, let's address the need of the hour. Coronavirus is an ongoing pandemic, and we need to deal with it effectively. So do wash your hands or sanitize your hands. Stay away from crowded places. Let's face this together and see that it doesn't grow even further. Let's try and hope for the best. So without further ado, let's just dive straight into the game. So the game began with c4, e5, the English g3, knight f6, bishop g2, and here black chose a really a little bit of an odd choice with bishop c5. Generally, we see more of c6 or d5, which are main lines, considered to be main lines in this position. But bishop c5 was an interesting choice by Wang Hao, and after d3, castle. Knight c3, c6, we have converted a transpose to a similar sort of position in the English. So after knight f3, d6, rook e8 would not be good because after knight takes e5, if rook takes e5, we have d4, and after bishop takes f2, king takes f2, rook takes e5, white can try to artificially castle with rook f1 and king g1, and he maintains the pair of bishops, which should be beneficial for him in the later stages of the game. So after d6, castle, rook e8, white played knight a4. Now, interesting thing is, if white had played something like a3, black should definitely retreat his bishop back to b6 because knight a4 was a strong threat which would gain white the bishop. So bishop e6, and maybe after knight a4, retreating the bishop to c7 would keep the bishop on the board, and that would be important and necessary. But white played knight a4, but after knight a4, white black just played bishop b4, a3, bishop a5. Natural way to expand with e4, bishop c7, and e4. Now e4, you would consider it to be a bad choice, consider like keeping the bishop on g2 in mind here. But the thing is, white has an idea of maybe that the pawn on e4 does block this bishop, but white has an idea of maybe going with knight h4 and trying to take control of the f5 square here, and also maybe he wants to expand in the center with d4 after a little bit of preparation, maybe defending the e4 pawn at rook e1 and looking for d4 to expand in the center. So e4 isn't really bad choice in this kind of positions. So let's continue. After a5, bishop b2, knight a6. Now this was also an interesting choice by Wang Hao because after b5, cb5, cb5, knight c5, knight into c5, d into c5. Maybe like if white did play a4 in the game, but after rook c1 and b6, you can consider this to be a tall pawn because it's behind all this pawns here. It doesn't really look a good bishop here, and it's really interesting that Wang Hao chose this variation, but maybe he had an idea of his own that will come across in the later stages of the game. But I would I would definitely prefer bishop e6 and knight d7 as an approach here because that would keep things intact without spoiling my structure. But let's look at the game. After cb5, knight c5, knight into c5, dc5 and a4, bishop g4, rook a3. Now an interesting rook lift here. There is some finesse in it, maybe trying to get to c3, defending the d3 pawn also. But something simple like queen c2 also would do the job, attacking c5, and after b6, maybe try something like knight d2, knight c4, and if after black does take bishop f3, and b6, maybe white can further try to improve the bishop via d1 and b3, and this would be a very nice diagonal for this bishop. Well, something like that could have been played out, but Ding Liren chose rook a3, which is also good. But after knight d7, an idea maybe to try to activate the knight to d4 this way. h3, bishop h5, and queen b1. Again, now queen c2 here, we can see a reason that maybe white didn't choose queen c2, because let's say after b6, black does have an idea of going via f8 to e6 and head to the d4 square, where the queen will come under the attack immediately. So maybe keeping that in mind, he just moved the queen to b1 and has an idea of moving the other rook to c1. So after b6 and knight d2, knight f8, bishop f3, well, that's a bad bishop there on g2. Exchanging it is a good thing, definitely. After queen g5, h4 is a nice move, because after queen d2, bishop d h5, let's say black plays something like g6, white can easily retreat the bishop to d1 and put it on this diagonal. So that'll be a strong bishop to play with for white. But Wang Hao rightly so retreated the queen back to g6 and queen d1, and this is a very good way to transfer the queen to an active square on f3. Well, after bishop f3, queen f3, well, he's activated the queen from b1 to f3, which is a good square, and the knight will be heading to c4 now. Back to h5 and queen f5. Well, this exchange was a little bit intriguing. I was watching it live and I was a little surprised by this move. I expected something like knight c4, knight e3, rook d1, maybe trying to keep the queens on the board and go along with the game. But interestingly, Ding chose queen f5. Now Wang Hao didn't capture on f5, but let's look at what could happen after f5, like rook at d8. Maybe he had an idea of trying to get the king to e4, and that I feel was one of the only reasons this could be useful. Knight e4 or knight c4 can also be an option here, but I think this was his main idea, to get the king to e4, which is very interesting, thinking quite deeply. It may not come immediately, but somewhere later down the road, we could see the king heading to e4 and then further to d5 and c6, which would be a spectacular way to get the king into the game. But black did not capture on f5 and just played rook d8, ignoring it completely. White took on g6, knight g6, and played king g2, f6, well, consolidating his structure. This does make the bishop on c7 bad, but well, maybe he could try to improve his knight and try to hold something together, a fortress kind of thing, and just hope for the best. Knight c4, standard idea, maybe capturing one of the squares. And after king f7, bishop c1, well, trying something like f4, but we'll come across that soon. Here he played f4, and I feel like this was a little bit premature, because maybe white should have taken it slowly, like let's say bishop e3, rook d8, rook d1, try to improve his king positioning, and eventually try to get f4 on the board, maybe somewhere later, or just be satisfied with the draw. This is the first game of the tournament, and maybe it wasn't, if it wasn't really possible to get a win, maybe a draw would have been sufficient. But Ding had other ideas, and maybe he felt like a win would be a really nice thing. Rightly so, in this position, you would definitely think, considering this bishop is strong, bishop is bad, and our knight is very nice. His knight also is kind of out of play on g6. Our bishop also is well placed here on c1. So maybe white thought that it would be a good idea to go for something here, but I think the timing was completely off, and after f4 the position started deteriorating for white slowly and slowly. ef4, bishop f4, clearly gf4 would just simply lose a pawn on h4. So after bishop f4, knight f4, now black gets too greedy and tries knight h4, king g3. The knight is under attack, and after knight g6 we will lose a dear friend on b6, which will also allow white to get a pass pawn there, so it'd be important to keep that pawn there. So bishop f4 wouldn't be good. So knight f4, gf4, and again this tall pawn is doing a great job here on c7, defending everything together here, holding everything except this pawn on h5. Every other pawn is on a dark square, and by general chess principles you wouldn't want to get in this situation as black, but surprisingly it is working out perfectly, and it is working out for this one particular move here. This was the important time for black to get this move on the board. I would like you to pause the video and see if you could get what black did next here. But if it did get the move, then that's quite nice, because f5 is a perfect time to play this move. Not delaying by one move, not delaying by two. Something like rook e6 will allow white to pounce with f5, and then hold everything solid here with king e2. Then he can take his own merry time and try to put his rooks on the g file and do whatever he feels like doing eventually. Maybe try to get rook f3, defend this pawn, hold this everything under control. He can play out different plans, at least in this position. He cannot lose for sure. But after f5 being the perfect move here, suddenly white has problems. Clearly f5 is not a good thing because he's weakening his pawns and secondly allowing black to penetrate onto the 7th rank, which would be highly detrimental. So white played e5 and tried to hold everything together. And the next move also was fairly important. Rook e6. Not something like g6 which would kill black's every opportunity to enter into black's camp, but rook e6 with the idea of rook g6 and rook g4 was just too strong of an idea. Maybe this is what Dinglerin missed in the game, and that led to his downfall, but it's a very strong idea here. Wang Hao did not miss out on that. King f3, rook g6 and knight e3, trying to hold everything together. King e6, rook d1. Well, one more important factor here is when the knight retreats back to e3, our dear friend on b6 now doesn't need any support, and this bishop here, tall pawn, can be used now for something, and that's exactly what Wang Hao did with bishop d8. Now this pawn on h4 is a potential target which white will have to defend with his own pieces. So out comes rook a2, a nice way trying to use an active way. Well, a passive way would be rook h1, but white chose an active way with rook a2 because after bishop h4 he was thinking maybe rook h2, and if the bishop moves, capture the h5 pawn, get something going, some counterplay. But here also black had a nice resource, and that was rook g4. Surprisingly, this works out well because after knight g4, let's say h g4, king e2 and something like bishop g3, and once black captures the f4 pawn, white does not really have a good way to penetrate into black's game easily here. These two pawns, connected pass pawns, will be very dangerous. Wang Hao did not capture on h4. He played rook d4 here. Like I said earlier, like they are less on time, low on time, so they're just trying to play it fast and maybe try to get to the next time control, which will be after 40 moves. This is the 37th move going on right now. So after knight c2, rook d5, knight e3, black should have maybe repeated with rook d4, but Wang Hao just casually went with rook d7, and here Ding missed out on his golden opportunity to save this position. I would like you to once again pause the video and see if you could get a way for white to generate some active counterplay and save this game. Well, if you did get d4, then you're on a whole another level here, because this move is just spectacular. This is not so easy to see, but the entire point will be seen when we look at the entire variation. Because if you play cd4, this would be pretty simple, because after rook c2, white is heading to c6, and black cannot really capture on e3. A simple tactic to follow here: rook into d7 and rook into g6, and that should be lost to black. And that's pretty simple. But suppose black does something else, like maybe captures a pawn. Once again, after rook c6, king f7 and knight into f5, this would also be a bad situation for black, because now the d4 pawn will fall, and after that these two connected pawns will be creating problems for black in this position later on. So this would be a bad situation. But after rook into d4, rook into d4, c into d4, no longer do we have the rook c2 idea. C into d into e3 would be simply met with rook c6, king f7, and that would be time for white to resign here. But that isn't the case after knight c2. Surprisingly, this is what is working out well for for white. And after king d5, the entire point is this move, knight into d4. Surprisingly, that bishop on d8 is the entire reason this whole variation works out well for white. Now the point is, black cannot go out to b4 and try to capture the a4 pawn, because after rook d6 it is he who will have problems, and if he just keeps it as it is, then there is no proper improvement. Let's say rook g4, white is going to again push e6, so it's a bit of a problem here for black, and maybe he can try something like rook g1, but the game will go on into different territory. Here white should be able to hold pretty easily, maybe even try for more. But That did not happen in the game, considering it's the 40th move, and Ding just played something safe with rook d2. And here, black didn't leave any chances and capitalized right away with bishop to h4. Rook g2 was played by Ding, but after rook h2, we simply have rook g3, king e2, and g5 would g5 would do the job just fine. F into g5, bishop to g5. White does not have time to capture on h5 because e3 is hanging. Let's say knight c4 and h4, and black should be clearly better here. There is no entry point for these rooks. These rooks on a2 and h2, and surprisingly our dear friend on b6 is no longer needed, because after knight b6 comes rook d3, and it is white who has to worry more about his king than utilize his pawn for a pass pawn as a pass pawn there, because that will not come to it. Knight c4, let's say rook d4. The game should be pretty much falling apart soon for white here, but in the game, Ding with rook g2, and once again pause the video and see if you could get what black did here. Well, Wang Hao came out with the best move in the position, which is rook g4. And this is giving up an exchange, but this is the strongest way to continue, because after you capture with something like knight g4 at g4, let's say king e3, black can easily play something like g5, fg5, bishop g5, king e2, king into e5, and further look for something like f4. These two pawns and the bishop combo are just too dangerous. White's king is also not really well placed. The rook on a2 not doing much, so this is just going to be lost. After king d4, the king is also pretty safe on d4, surprisingly, and that should fall apart. Like rook h2, just f4, rook h5, you can just maybe hold it with king f5 and then push your pawns ahead. That should be lost pretty soon here for white. So Ding did not capture on g4, rather played rook h2. But after g6, this is a nice finesse here. It was not really necessary. Rook g3 also would be winning. King e2 and g5, like we saw earlier, that would also be winning. But Wang Hao played g6, and after knight g4, fg4. This time fg4, because these pawns are protected, and you can try to push and utilize these two pawns as connected pawns. After king e3 and bishop e7, just retreating it back, showing that simple chess also can be good enough sometimes. Rook d2 and h4, and Ding just saw that there was not much to do here. He tries king e4, out comes rook d4, and that would also be detrimental, like the pawns will keep rolling. So he just had enough and resigned here right at h4, and a sad ending for Ding here, but I feel like maybe he shouldn't have tried too much. It was the first game, could have played it a little bit slowly and cautiously. We had a lot of expectations from Ding. It's a big tournament. It's still going to go on for quite some time. He will bounce back for sure, and we'll see a lot of interesting games from him in the ongoing tournament. Well, hopefully everything goes smoothly in the entire candidates, and everybody stays safe, everybody stays healthy for the entire tournament, and hopefully we get some good games to analyze too, some good chess. If you do like the video, hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon to stay tuned and updated with upcoming videos. Candidates is going to be very interesting this year, so stay tuned, and I will see you soon in the next one. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and see you soon. Bye bye.